Hey fellas, what's going on? It's Azekahh here, reading for the Doom Pie Network. Got another fanfiction reading for you today, as is my specialty and his specialty. So we figured we might meet up and do a little bit of a collaboration. Get a little ching chong with bing bong. All right, so I'm going to be reading The Longest Night by name I can't remember right now, but I'll post it in the thingy, so you'll be able to see it there. Okay. So, here we go. It's about Celestia. That's as far as I know. Night fell across Equestria, bringing with it a gentle reprieve of a long day of celebration for the ponies who called the land their home. After 2 decades of the sun and moon swapping places almost randomly or hanging in the sky for days or even weeks on end, the return to normality was almost odd. The day had been spent feasting and drinking as soldiers returned to their homes, from the small towns of Manhattan and Baltimore to the fortress village of Vancouver. The nation, as a whole, rejoiced. Ponies, who days before would have attempted to kill each other on sight, walked side by side into the many inns and taverns that dotted the cobblestone roads. There they would deposit their armor, whether the gold and steel of the Celestial Army or the dark leather of the Lunar Regular didn't matter, and raise a mug of frothic ale together. Few held illusions that the wounds and scars of the Civil War would heal quickly. Feuds and anger did not disappear along with Nightmare Moon. They were not magically healed by the elements of harmony as the artifacts sealed the mad goddess within the moon. Very few knew of the elements, or the role they had played in Nightmare Moon's defeat, and fewer still cared to uncover the hidden truth. But, for this one day and night, all grievances were put aside. All they knew, as word spread from the dispersing survivors, was that a great and final battle had been waged in the heartlands of the troubled nation. There, deep in the once tranquil forest of the Everfree, before the walls of the castle of the Royal Pony Sisters, 2 armies had clashed as the goddess they followed warred above. Such had been their fury that the magic of the forest became tainted and unpredictable. In the end, Celestia had emerged victorious, and the mad goddess calling herself Nightmare Moon was gone. With Nightmare Moon defeated, the army she had amassed through trickery, deceit, and corrupt magic collapsed. On the edge of the Everfree, the wounded of that battle rested and retreated. Kind-hearted Earth Pony healers moved from tent to tent, treating wounds with poultices? I think that's how you say that. Probably. Poultices or something like that. And soothing touches. Their training was little, and their understanding of infection poor. Many of the wounded would die in the coming weeks, and those who lived would carry the scars with both pride and shame. Overlooking the camp, a stony expression on her face, sat the ruler of Equestria. She had just completed, for the first of many times, the act of raising the moon, and had seen the dark mar across its once shining silver surface. "Forgive us, sister, for being so blind," Celestia sighed, privately wishing that she could cry, so she'd have tears to wipe away. It was an almost unknown fact that an alicorn could shed tears and sadness, but once in 100 years. There was a hollow ache deep in her heart that nothing could ever fill so long as her beloved Luna was gone. It was her fault, Celestia knew, that all of the misery of civil war and Luna's banishment had come to pass. Perhaps if she had been more attentive to her sister's needs rather than basking in the false glory of the day, Luna never would have fallen to madness. Celestia wanted to cry, yet no tears came to her eyes. Through a wet haze of approaching fog, Celestia saw just beyond the last golden edge of twilight a star fall from the sky, tumbling and spinning towards the land so far below. Watching the dying star, Celestia sent a silent plea towards the heavens that they return her sister, if just for one night. She couldn't survive the centuries and millennia ahead alone. She had to tell her sister how truly sorry she was for what she had done, for what she had transpired. Every fiber of her being was poured towards the distant, tumbling, doomed speck, hoping beyond hope to make it understand. Slowly, the star fell behind the line of mountains in the west, and was gone. A long sigh touching her lips, Celestia made to stand. The star never would have fallen and died had Luna still been around. It was her, not Celestia, who was the true guardian of the night. Another victim to add to the long list that haunted every waking moment of the goddess of the sun. As she began to descend the hill, a startling sight made Celestia pause. 2 more stars were tumbling out of the sky. Perhaps they missed their own sister, and they had cast themselves out from their place in the heavens to chase after her. A bitter smile cracked Celestia's grim face at the thought. If she was in the stars' place, and it was Luna who had just fallen down to Equestria, Celestia would have followed her sister in one beat of her immortal heart. But she was not a star, and Luna was in a place Celestia could never go to. Surprisingly, these 2 new falling stars were not following the first. Instead, they were heading down towards the small dale beyond the hill. In a streak of lavender and blue, the 2 stars roared overhead, shaking the equine valley, and waking those few among the camp who had managed to steal some sleep. A brilliant flash lit the young night that was followed moments later by the rumble of the stars' impact and a rush of wind. Dumbfounded, it took Celestia several long moments to get her mind to work again. Her long, majestic wings stroking the sky, Celestia took flight and headed towards the fallen stars. It didn't take her long to reach them. Wings folding to rest gently at her sides, Celestia slowly trotted into a wide crater, the golden armor on her hooves hissing as they dug into the scorched earth. Turning her head left and right, Celestia could feel the powerful, lingering after-effects of magic. These were not ordinary stars, Celestia realized as she strode deeper into the crater. Sheathing her horn in magic with a readied ward in case whatever had knocked these stars from the night was near, Celestia rounded an overturned hunk of basalt. Her mouth fell open, and the magic around her horn vanished as her eyes beheld what, or rather, who, had been the stars. The first was a lavender mare Celestia didn't recognize. A starburst soul mark was on her flank, surrounded by 5 smaller stars, and her dark navy blue mane and tail were broken with a 2-toned pink and purple stripe. None of this was worth any particular note. Many ponies were bright or vibrant colors and had multicolored manes. No, what grabbed Celestia's attention was how the mare's mane glistened like it was covered in diamond dust and fanned across 2 long wings, and then there was a long spiral horn that thrust like a lance from the mare's forehead. With her mouth now open wide for a wagon to enter, Celestia shifted her gaze to the second pony, and at once her heart seized and turned to crystal. "Luna?" Celestia whispered, and started at the sound of her own voice in the sudden silence of the chilly night. Stepping closer to the pony resembling her younger sister, Celestia gently brushed away the tail that was like a window onto a field of stars, to reveal a black and silver soul mark of a crescent moon on a dark patch. Heart fluttering, Celestia swept aside the mane, covering the navy blue alicorn's face. "Oh, Mother, it is Luna." Gentle sobs racking her body, Celestia bent down and cradled her sister's head in her arms. After a short time, the sobs stopped. In her heart, the coolness of despair was replaced by the coiled warmth of rage. This could not be her sister, Celestia knew, shifting her gaze to the moon, complete with the shadowy head of the mare it contained. She needed time to think and sort out the emotions clamoring through her heart. Gentle as the kiss of a father landing on a foal's nose, Celestia picked up the 2 mares and headed back towards the camp. As was normal for Luna, she woke with a start. Shooting out of bed, hurling covers aside in a burst of telekinetic energy, she found her thoughts a little hazier than was normal, and Luna, for the life of her, couldn't really recall how exactly she'd gotten to bed. Blinking blearily, Luna spotted a basin filled with water and staggered over towards it, and without any ceremony plunged her face onto the icy surface. "Wow, I needed that," Luna said, shaking her face so cool droplets sprayed around her. I'm not certain. I don't really know how Luna sounds because I haven't listened to Luna in a while, so if my voice is off, I apologize. Having woken herself up a bit more, Luna sent her awareness up to check on the moon. It was where her initial clock said it should be, but there was something off that Luna couldn't quite place her hoof on. The orbit was a little wrong and would bring the moon a little too close to Equestria in the early hours of the morning, and cause the tides to be a bit too high. Deciding that had to be it, and charing herself to make such an error, even if she'd obviously been asleep when she raised the moon, something that almost never happened, Luna nudged the moon back into its proper orbit. Opening her eyes again, Luna felt a frown tug at her face. Now that her mind was starting to work again, Luna found it was rather perplexed by her surroundings. Where she had been expecting the lavishly redecorated guest bedroom in the Books and Branches Library in Ponyville, complete with silver and navy banners with her cutie mark thrown over stuffed bookshelves, Luna was instead confronted by an equally lavish tent, decorated in crimson and gold with banners proudly displaying Celestia's cutie mark. Rubbing her eyes, Luna looked left and right, poking some of the plush cushions and the stands filled with spears and swords, and lifting a goblet, expecting at any moment that her sister would leap out, yelling, "Surprise!" "Okay, Tia, ha! You got me!" Luna began to pace around the tent, and then stopped when her gaze fell on a very specific object. It was a sword with a blade as tall as Luna. The blade's surface moved like a pot of molten gold, roiling and bubbling away contentedly. A ruby the size of her hoof, and shaped like an eye, watched her from the crossguard. Gold leaf and inlays surrounding it in intricate swirls. After several minutes staring back at the other, the ruby blinked. "Aha!" Luna exclaimed, thrusting a hoof towards the greatsword. "I win." Then she tilted her lips to one side and pursed her lips in a pensive frown. "But what are you doing out of the vaults?" Luna approached the greatsword and gave it a gentle poke. A hissing squeal broke from Luna, and she shook her hoof, the smell of burnt hair striking her senses. "Okay, I get it. You're still mad at me." Turning away from the greatsword, Luna thrust her nose into the air and gave a disdainful snort. "You think you would ever get over it after 1,003 years?" Leaving the temperamental greatsword, Luna went to the tent's flap and poked her head out. She was immediately greeted by two very startled-looking guards in weathered armor. Two things struck Luna as odd immediately. The first being that both guards were mares. The royal guards had centuries ago become stallion only after an off-comment Celestia had made on Hearthwarming Eve. And the second was that their armor was appropriately 800 years out of date, give or take a decade. Smiling at the two guards, Luna said, "Good evening. If you could be so kind as to—" "Ah, perfect!" Luna's smile broadened as a young tan earth pony with a plow for a cutie mark walked past the tent. "Excuse me, do you work in the palace? I can't recall seeing you before." A hoof tapping her chin, Luna squinted at the tan pony, comparing her against the mental catalogue Luna had of every pony who worked in the palace. For her part, the earth pony had frozen mid-stride, and was staring at Luna with a look of pure, unbridled terror. She must normally work only during the day, Luna finally decided with a shrug, and continued. "Could you get me some acai berry tea and a pot of chamomile with 6 drops of honey? Thank you kindly." Not waiting for a response, Luna withdrew her head back into the tent, mulling over the sea of other tents she had just seen. If this was a practical joke, then Celestia certainly had pulled out all the stops. But then again, Celestia loved her pranks. She was a bit legendary around the palace as an accomplished practical joker. If one looked hard enough, one would often find that everything from pepper and tea furniture being magically stuck to the ceiling could be traced back to Celestia. Though it was often hard to find solid evidence of Celestia's involvement, she'd always managed to somehow be just the innocent bystander. Well, not this time. Luna was bound and determined not to play into her sister's hooves. No, Luna knew that Celestia was waiting for her to freak out and demand to know what was going on, so she would keep cool and collected, and play along until Celestia showed herself, though this was a lot of effort for Celestia to go through just for a prank. Luna had come to the conclusion that it had been to Luna had come to the conclusion that it had to have been Celestia who raised the moon, which explained the wrong orbit. On a whim, Luna again reached out to the moon so high above. By her internal reckoning, it was just about midnight, and as she expected, the moon was where it was supposed to be with her earlier judgment. But it still felt wrong. But Luna just couldn't place her hoof on what exactly was the source of the feeling. Shrugging, Luna waited for her tea, and waited, and then she waited some more. Just as Luna was about to sigh and go looking for the tea herself, she heard a short argument outside of the tent, Held in telekinetic glow, the flap was opened and the earth pony timidly swept into the tent. Never lifting her eyes off the ground, she deposited a tray with 2 pots and 2 cups onto the table, and then began to quickly back towards the exit. "Wait!" Luna's voice pierced the unknown mare, making her freeze mid-step. "I'm curious. Where is my sister?" Your sister, ma'am? I know not whither Princess Celestia be, ma'am. May I take my leave? By your blessing?" The mare looked longingly towards the tent's exit as she answered. Luna frowned, and with a wave of her hoof dismissed the mare. The frown only deepened as she poured the tea. The acai berry tea was not quite what she was expecting. In the years since Luna's return, the royal kitchen had learned of her preference for the rare tea blend, and always kept a healthy, fresh supply available. This blend was lacking. Suspicions danced through Luna's thoughts, but they were too mad to consider. Celestia's old sword, coronal edge, the delightfully antiquated armor of the guards outside the tent, the fact that the guards were mares, the dialect and accent of the servant, combined with the fear that had shimmered into her timid brown eyes, it all added up to only one thing. This was Celestia's greatest prank ever. That, or Luna had somehow wound up centuries in the past. But that was too ludicrous for Luna to take seriously, and besides, the simpler explanation was often the most probable. Or something like that. Luna had read it in a book. Several moments passed. Luna tried to enjoy the flavorless tea, but it was like drinking water strained through the remains of old socks and moldy newspaper. The instant the thought went through her, Luna sighed and put the cup aside, her taste for the tea now gone. Again, the tent's flap was opened, and this time Luna didn't have to look to see who was entering. She knew the tread of her sister as intimately as her own. "Ah, Tia, there you are. I have to compliment you on the—" Luna stopped mid-sentence as she looked up, saw her sister, and then laughed. Celestia stood framed in the open tent, a perplexed glower pulling at her fair features. Silvery moonlight glinted off the battered golden armor Celestia wore, further heightening an aura of dignified power and experience that clung to the elder alicorn like a cloak. Closing the tent as she stepped fully into the light cast by the lit braziers, Celestia set her jaw in a determined line. "Tell us, impostor, why should we not destroy thee outright for this most vile and contemptible deception? Long have we pondered your arrival and appearance, and truly we cannot understand its purpose. Did thou seek to worm thy way into our heart, and usurp our sister's rightful place? If so, thine folly is truly great." Luna couldn't help it. After silence rang through the tent for a bare hoofful of long sentence, Celestia's glare promising swift destruction if her venomous questions were not answered to her satisfaction, Luna fell backwards as a long billowing peal of laughter erupted from her. It filled the tent as the dark alicorn rolled onto her side as tears of mirth flooded from her eyes. "Oh, I see now why you tried so hard not to laugh the first few months after my return," Luna said, with her laughter finally died down enough so that she could speak. Stamping a hoof, Celestia ground her teeth together. "Answer our questions. We know that thou cannot be our sister, for we saw her just moments ago as naught but a shadow upon the face of her beloved moon." Those words sent a chill up Luna's back and instantly banished all the mirth that had remained giggling from her lips. Pressing her mouth into a hard line, Luna glared up at her sister. Excuse me?" Pacing back and forth through the tent, Celestia seemed to not hear Luna. Snorting and pawing at the ground, the elder alicorn continued her tirade. "If thou believes we are weak, and think to strike us at our moment of greatest grief, thou should be warned. The heavens will rain down upon thee in wrath and pain. This is the most hideous and contemptuous act that has ever been lain before our eyes. So, speak, and be judged." Standing slowly, Luna looked her sister over, gazed around the room, and then returned to Celestia. "Did Dasher Pinky put you up to this, Tia?" Luna asked. But even then, as she asked the question, Luna felt that she knew the answer. "Thou dost not get to call us by that name!" Yes, she definitely had her answer, Luna thought as she reeled back from the venom and anger lacing Celestia's voice. But there was something else. An undercurrent of pain and sorrow so profound that not even righteous indignation could cover it fully. Closing her eyes, Luna again sent her senses up towards her moon. And this time, she wasn't just checking its position. Now she knew what she was looking to find. And when she found it, Luna almost recoiled, as if physically struck. Pressing on, Luna pushed more of herself into the moon, letting it become one with herself. Behind closed eyes, she looked down on a changed Equestria. Or rather, one that wasn't changed. Gone were the sea of lights that glimmered like fields of fireflies along the east and west coasts, or snaked like lines towards the center. Looking closer, Luna saw that the roads were all wrong. Entire towns were missing, as were those new-fangled railways for those loud and smelly trains. There was also something else with her gazing down on the sleeping world. It was like sitting beside a storm, but one impotent and helpless in its rage and anger. Luna's physical heart sped for a moment as she released her connection to the silvery orb high overhead. Opening her eyes, she said, "Tia, I am not an imposter. I think I know what's going on. I just have some simple questions, and please, answer them honestly." Luna waited for Celestia to stop pacing and give a stern nod of consent. "First, what is the date?" "We do not see what—" "Please, Tia. What is the date?" "It is the 560th year of our reign, by equestrian reckoning." The number made an odd sense to Luna, and she shuddered as her suspicions were all but confirmed. She just wanted a few more answers to be totally certain. "How did you find me?" Tilting her head to one side, Celestia lost herself in thought for a brief time before she said, "We were sitting upon a hill not far from here. When we looked up, we spied a brilliant light descending towards us that landed in a nearby dale. Inspecting the sight, we found thee, lying amongst the smouldering heart of a crater." "And was I alone?" Chewing on her lip, Celestia slowly shook her head. "Where is she?" And that's all for part 1, folks. So I'm gonna get the other half out here sometime soon. Keep checking back on the channel and get yourself a nice fix on the rest of the story,